Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Alice and today I want to do another brand review, and the brand of the day will be H&M, specifically their sustainability scheme. Now if you're here, you probably already know that H&M is really not that sustainable, but they reached a whole new level of greenwashing with their sustainability scheme, and it's pretty effective, so I think it's very important to discuss it. And how I do it, I want to go through the website with you and basically comment what they wrote on their webpage to see what's true, what's not, and what's problematic. Before starting though, I want to make clear that I am in no way judging you if you ever fell in their trap, because I really believe it's a trap, and I do not agree that consumers have a responsibility to double and triple check everything. I think it's necessary, unfortunately, but it's not fair. It shouldn't be like this. It's a brand responsibility to be right and to be honest about it. So let's start with the recycling page, because honestly, that's golden. They start straight away by telling us that 10% of the environmental impact of garments depends on what we as consumers do with that garment. Now, if you actually do the math, that means that at least 90% does not depend on us. It's more than likely dependent on them. But we know that psychologically we tend to get hung up to the first number we hear, which means that we immediately think at what we can do better as consumer, instead of thinking that 90% depend on them and start investigating what they are or are not doing. This is a very clever way to put the responsibility on us as consumer, instead of being really accountable for what they are doing, considering that the responsibility is way bigger. And on top of that, they are technically telling the truth. So if you ever try to call them out, they can very easily sit back and say, well, but nothing we said is wrong. True, unfortunately. But things get even better. They of course tell us immediately what we can do to improve our footprint, which basically means that we can bring them our clothes to be either sold second-hand or recycled. The problem is that the H&M doesn't sell second-hand items, so those clothes will go straight away into a charity shop, and we know that what doesn't get sold gets to developing countries, where the majority of it will go into landfill anyway, point being that someone else will take care, or better, will have to take the responsibility of those clothes. When it comes to clothes that get recycled, things are not that much better. Actually, they are worse, because we know that around 1% is actually recycled, the rest goes to landfill. And for once, this is not entirely H&M fault, because the problem is that recycling clothes can be quite difficult. The majority of our clothes are mixed fabrics, and we don't really have the technology to separate the fabrics and reuse them separately. And what we have at the moment is not cost effective. Also, when it comes to polyester, for example, the polyester that we use for clothes is very weak, so there's not that much more that we can do with it. And in fact, if you really pay attention to it, the majority of clothes made in recycled polyester, they are not recycled. The polyester doesn't come from other clothes. It normally comes from a recycled bottle or recycled nets anyway, harder plastic, not clothes, because again, too weak. And they conclude their whole charade with this fantastic statement that says, do you know that the last year we collected 30,000 tons of clothes, 40% more of last year? As if that amount of waste is ever a good news, as if thinking that we increase our waste of 40% is actually something to celebrate. And pay attention to how they phrase it. Of course, they lead us into think that they did something with their clothes, but actually they don't. They're just telling that they collected that amount of clothes. They're telling nothing about what they do with their clothes, because of course we know that there's not that much that they can do apart from throwing them away. Point being though, the reason why they're doing that is not, let's be clear, they don't care anything of what happened to those clothes, but by doing that they bring us into the store, and when we recycle our clothes, they give us a voucher to spend into the store. So they don't only get us in, they also give us something like sort of a reward to buy something there. So they are leading us to buy more, which I have to give it to them. It's pretty genius from a business perspective, but that's not sustainable at all, because our recycling has virtually no impact at all, because those clothes are just thrown away, and we are buying more, which is the opposite of sustainability. But things get even better if we consider that on top of the voucher, we also get reward points. Because the newest invention of H&M sustainability scheme is that we can get reward conscious points for every conscious actions we are doing. And those points get translated into another voucher that we can, of course, use to spend more money on H&M. And of course, the first conscious action that they indicate is buying from their conscious line, and they really take care to point out that if you then use your voucher to buy from the conscious line again, then you get even more points that you can use to buy again. Do you see the infinite loop? Again, genius from a business point of view, but terrible from an environmental point of view, because they are pushing to overconsumption. And it's not really that difficult, because we feel rewarded, we feel that we are doing something good, so we don't feel bad in buying even more. It doesn't work this way, I am very, very sorry to tell you. But since we mentioned it, let's have a look at the conscious line, shall we? Now, please keep in mind that they gave their own definition of what is a conscious item, and they have no certification to back it up whatsoever. So basically, we have to trust them on the word. And what makes a conscious item is having at least 50% of sustainably sourced or recycled materials. Now, honestly, 50% is not that big. It's not even close to what a real sustainable brand like Organic Basic is doing. And anyway, this definitely means that there will be there will be mixed fiber items, which we already know that means they are less recyclable, which is not that great for a conscious line to make an item that is way more difficult to recycle. Anyway, when we look at the items, things get even funnier, because it really seems that they are applying their own definition pretty randomly. I mean, you have some items that really have a 50% or around of organic cotton, although again they don't really have a certification, so we don't really know if that is truly organic cotton. And then we have items that are completely made in polyester that is not even recycled. So please help me out here. What exactly is sustainable here? Unclear. Now, on top of that, you have to consider that in this line alone you have more than 1,000 pieces. That's hardly sustainable, especially considering that this is only a small portion of the entire H&M production, which means that even if their sustainable line was really as sustainable as they claim it to be, this system is still not sustainable. It's still fast fashion. It still relies on huge quantity of items being churned out every few weeks, and people constantly buying in and out stuff. So there's nothing sustainable in here, because the system is not meant to be sustainable. And of course, this doesn't even take into account workers' rights. Yes, they have a few wishy-washy statements in which they say that they are paying people living wage, and they do have a code of conduct, but again, everything is internal, so there is really nothing to prove that what they are saying is the truth. And the last page I want to really look at is the transparency page. Now, they are really take a lot of pride of the fact that they are extremely transparent. They are one of the best in terms of transparency, which is actually true. Now, even if you look at what we discussed today, there's nothing actually false about what they are saying. It's just that they present the truth in a way that makes them look better than that they actually are, which is the essence of greenwashing. But they're not technically lying. And here is the core of the problem. We really brought transparency too far. Of course, transparency is important because it's what we need to determine if a brand is sustainable or not. But transparency is not a goal in itself and should not be a goal in itself, because even if you're honest about being terrible, you are still terrible. That doesn't change, it doesn't make you better. And this is exactly a case. Yes, H&M is truly good in terms of transparency, but that's all they are good at, and it's honestly not enough. Now, I didn't touch at every single page inside the sustainability page because that would be really too much, so I touched only on the big topics and the biggest problem I see. But there is one last comment that kind of goes for everything they're saying across the board, and that is they're very, very good in pointing the responsibility towards us much more than towards them. And you see that there are a ton of advice about how we can do things better as consumers. They even have a whole page dedicated to how to better care for your clothes, how to DIY your clothes, etc. All of that is good in theory, but this is not the right place to talk about it. I mean, as a company, they should take responsibility for what they are doing more than telling us what we have to do once we are at home, because again, our responsibility account for 10%, which is still something. Of course, we have to be responsible with our items, but their responsibility is better, and as a company, they need to tackle that before tackling us. In conclusion, their sustainability program is incredibly good from a business perspective, but is honestly terrible from an environmental perspective. So it didn't change my opinion. If you can avoid fast fashion, do avoid fast fashion. If you can't afford sustainable brands, it's absolutely not a problem. If you can, go second hand. And if you really are in the situation in which you can't buy outside fast fashion, fine, but then I wouldn't get too hung up on their conscious line. I would rather focus on find things that are better quality, so that they will last longer and that you are sure that you will need and you will use for a very long time, instead of really focusing on trends, because ultimately these items will be way more sustainable in your specific situations than an item that comes from the conscious line but that you actually don't really love as much, or that is a trendy item so that you won't use for so long. So that's just my opinion, of course, but that's what I think. If you arrived till here, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to give it a thumbs up and maybe subscribing to my channel. I always do videos about sustainable living, zero waste and minimalism, so if you're interested in that, please, it would mean a lot to me. And since next time, bye!